She thinks I'm a chef on the rock. Guys, she's going to run when I tell her the truth.
Whatever you do, you don't tell her the truth.
Thank you.
You delay her. I wouldn't tell her till she's in her third trimester.
Yeah, I can't do that.
Dom, I know you, okay? And you're trying to grow a conscience here. Trust me on this one. Honesty is overrated, man. That's in the Bible. Old Testament.
Shabbat Shalom. Welcome, Bruchim Aba'im. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi. You found Beit Virtuali, and let's stir up a little Torah together. For those of you that were brought up believing that the Torah says, "Thou shalt not lie." First of all, why are you still using Shakespearean language? Dibra, Torah, Kalashon B'nei Adam. Torah speaks to us in the language of everyday humankind. Unless we are avid role players that use archaic affectation to make clear that our chaotic good level 27 half-elf does not live in Brooklyn and instead hails from southern Trentarfian woods in the magical kingdom of Ramir. Boy, that sounded like it came out way too easily. Then the thous are not going to aid us in comprehension, just setting Torah up outside of ourselves instead of near. And now that I got that out, Torah most certainly does not say, now translated into modern English, you shall not lie or you will not lie, but rather that in a legal dispute where something is on the line and our testimony influences a judgment against another, we cannot offer a testimony that is not true. Lo ta'aneh v'recha et shaker, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Updating even that translation to the late modern, you won't falsify testimony against your neighbor. And although it's not the point of this word of Torah, it seems self-evidently to relate to how we speak about each other online. Before we share, forward something, or pile on when life and livelihood can be affected, do we know that what we are forwarding is accurate and contextual? I mean, no one has ever made up something on the internet, right? No one's ever misrepresented events or created a skewed narrative for the sake of advancing their own ideology, have they? The point, however, is that, like it or not, our mom, dad, grandparent, guardian, or parental figure taught us thou shalt not lie, apparently not recognizing the irony at all, a blunt and inaccurate version of something specific and subtle. Now, I'm not supporting lying here. Jewish tradition has more texts than can be easily listed in this space regarding lying itself being not such a good thing. Those that claim that Judaism says so-called white lies are okay completely should probably look into the much greater subtlety of the passage that is based on, along with setting them next to the myriad of other texts that put falsehood into a pretty black and white negative light. And since, you really can't bring up something like this without citing a few sources, the white lie text comes from Tractate Yevamot, page 65b, and the statement of Rabbi Ilya that, quote, it is permitted to depart from the truth in a matter that will bring about peace. The problem with this passage, not at all speaking from expert experience, is how easy it is to use such words to justify what is actually quite often our fear. The Yevamot passage cites Joseph's brothers lying about Jacob's request for Joseph to pardon his brothers. Jacob never made such a request, but the lie created, according to this explanation in Talmud, the circumstance that allowed peace to finally exist between brothers. Holding back, I just blew our rent money on a new tie, so that a justified argument does not occur, is not what this teaching had in mind. Another of the subtle Talmudic passages, however, seems to explain a question you might have if you are deep reading the opening verse of Parshat Beha'alotcha. The first two verses read, the Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and say to him, when you light the lamps towards the face of the menorah, shall the 7 lamps cast their light. So far, so good. There's lots of discussion throughout history on the meaning of face of the menorah, but we'll leave that for another day. But notice in each verse, we get 2 different verbs for speaking, ledaber and lomar, usually translated as to speak and to say. The use of both in the first verse is easily explained as the rhythm of the language. We hear that verse all the time. Vaydaber Adonai Moshe lemor, the Eternal spoke to Moses, saying. But the second, speak to Aaron and say to him, is not quite as easily brushed away, even if it does perhaps seem a little innocent. Still, it's extra words. Speak to Aaron, man. Say something to him. Save a few words. What are we doing, writing a legal brief? There are subtle differences, however. Ledaber, or to speak, has a semantic set of speaking, declaring, demanding, commanding, warning, threatening, and yes, even singing. Lomar, or to say, has an overlap in our Venn diagram, but a true shift to the yin away from our yang of to speak. Lomar gives us say, answer, command, promise, intend, think and say in one's heart. I once got really annoyed with a rabbi who gave a heck of a sermon. I was annoyed, first of all, because his sermons were better than mine, and ego is one of the things I'm trying to work on. Second of all, I was annoyed because I had occasionally been taking the Yevamot passage as license to excuse white lies as they appeared. Rabbi David Stern, however, at the time the president of the Central Council of American Rabbis, decided to make me distinctly uncomfortable when he spent an entire sermon defining integrity as congruity with what we think and say. So, you see, we know from MRI scans of the brain that when we are told something that doesn't jive with our subjective house of cards self and or worldview, we begin firing the parts of our brain associated with our fight, flight, freeze instincts. We evolved to not challenge our worldview, no matter how misguided it might be. Which means when we hear stuff we don't want to hear, we get uncomfortable. So into my inner dialogue directed at him silently at the time, hey, wait, brilliant rabbi that is telling me something I don't want to hear. I always thought that we are not held accountable for our thoughts. It's actions that matter, man. I mean, when we go through the list of for the sins that we have committed against you on Yom Kippur, we list evil thoughts, but that's just because we're trying to tap on our hearts to get them to open up and be more aware of every dark part of ourselves. I get it. But if I'm thinking some dark thoughts, but I'm actually acting or saying the right thing, well, did you forget that little spiritual truth, fake it until you make it? Of course, what this truly brilliant rabbi was trying to get at, and I highly recommend you visit him if you're ever in Dallas, Texas, and go to Temple Emmanuel, was the subtle point that who we claim we are and who we are in truth when not congruent is problematic. This is quite often a result of a contradiction between what we say with our mouths and what we say with our hearts, what we daber and what we omer. From the practical side, and something that therapists deal with in nearly every case, especially when it comes to addiction, if we present ourselves as a different version for the public, but are not that in reality, we have to suppress and hide our reality from the public until the public-facing version of us eventually no longer has anything to do with who we are. They're also one that has set a powder keg alight and may not yet have realized that most of us reconnect the split halves only when we are forced to do so. The situations that force us to do so are usually unspeakably destructive for both us and those around us. But hey, shalom bait, peace in the household, right? If I say, I'm okay, everything's okay, then there are a few more minutes of peace. White lie, Talmud, I'm covered. But here's what the Talmud also says. In Tractate Pesachim, Daf 113b, we read, the Holy Blessed One of Being loves three types of people. One who does not get angry, one who does not get drunk, and one who is forgiving. The Holy Blessed One of Being hates three types of people. One who says one statement with their mouth and means another in their heart. One who knows testimony about another person and does not testify on their behalf. And one who observes a licentious matter performed by another and testifies against them alone, meaning with no one else to corroborate the testimony. That is, a reputation is not to be destroyed on the word of a single witness. By bringing up testimony, this passage certainly ties into the false witness utterance in the Torah. What we also see is a profound expansion on what within a lie is destructive, even for oneself, splitting the speak and the say. What we also learn is that the difference of saying and speaking is a deliberate part of Jewish consciousness. Those two verbs are there on purpose, and thus we have a clue as to why both are used in this moment between the eternal Moses and Aaron. As medieval Torah commentator Hezekiah ben Manoah points out, using thoughts of Ramban, Nachmanides, the beginning of Beha'alotcha takes place and must be understood right after all the other tribes at the end of our previous parsha have offered sacrifices for the consecration of the altar and the tabernacle. But this didn't include in the previous parsha the Levites, and it seems the Levites would be then left out of something so critical. But, as is pointed out, their act of giving light would be the final and actual consecration ritual, in addition to the one that would continue in perpetuity. Let's look at it this way. Quite practically, the job of the Danites, Asherites, Simeonites, and so forth was to live their life according to the law represented by the revelation at Sinai. Taken from a 10,000-foot view with a distinctively Kabbalistic vocabulary, these laws combined ritual practices to keep us sharpened and interconnected, and moral and ethical obligations to help us practically live with each other based on the needs of the time, with an eye to more profound interconnectivity as the generations revealed more of the hidden face of the eternal. That was the Kabbalistic part. The Levites, on the other hand, had the duty of enabling all that to happen. Most of us need, literally, light to work. The work of everyday life went to the tribes. The literal and metaphorical light they needed was to be tended by the Levites. So what happens if that source of light was corrupted from the very beginning? What happens when those responsible for enabling us to succeed in life themselves are living two different lives that contradict each other? So, speak to Aaron and say to him is a way for the Torah to join these two parts, the external and the internal, the expressed and the suppressed, the apparent and the hidden. There's a hidden command. Get congruent. There's also a second. If you lead, it can only be done with integrity. At the very least, the conscious search for that integrity through how we intentionally live. The iterative question that comes from this is perhaps best expressed as what I imagine the longer campfire discussion was between Moses and Aaron as the prophet prepared the priest for sacred duty. Except in this, we, who ever lead, teach, or mentor, are gathered with them to hear and learn, to challenge ourselves and feel very uncomfortable at our personal challenges to integrity. I imagine the conversation from Moses' mouth inspired by the divine presence went something like, Aaron, when you and your fellow Levites take over this duty of shining light at a practical and symbolic level, do this with integrity. When you provide light, let the source of that light be from within, while the temple menorot act as the external symbols that remind us of important internal truths. All humans, you included and especially, will struggle with this, but the tribes will look to you to do things that they cannot because they're plowing the fields. If you stand in front of a group to lead them, you have the extra burden that what you speak and say is the same. Lead with integrity because those who look to you can feel when it's not there and will learn from you which path they then will choose from your example. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We'll see you next time.
וקול שופר הריעו לפני המלך אדוני ירם הים ולא תבא ויושביה נאור